out at the University of Limpopo. And on her way back, this tragedy unfolded. Very, very terrible. In fact, made to understand she was only a breadwinner at her home, with both her siblings having passed away and left their children with their elderly mother, who in fact was taking care of them through her help as the sole breadwinner left in her family. You can imagine the tragedy that's befallen that family. And here at Newsroom Africa, and here on Your View, we want to say to the family, indeed, condolences. We will, of course, talk to the Minister of Minerals and Energy at the bottom of this hour to get her or his own reflections on her life. Let's take a listen to what he had to say on the sidelines of the visit to her home that took place earlier on today in Durban.
She is, when she was put as a deputy minister, I said to everybody, I want to contribution. One of the biggest problems between ministers and deputy ministers is that they normally get into a competition. But Vera was not competing. She was complementary. Hard, strong. I will miss that complementarity, because once we are complementing one another, you constitute a team. Once you are a team, you are stronger. And I'm going to miss that a great deal. She couldn't wait. If you want to say something, even you are speaking, she jumps on you. Abe sekhuluma ngesizulu athi ndikhele emadeveni uthi wamsusa emadeveni, when he speaks and umhlale emadeveni nathi akanamadevu uza kuwaqhubeke angangimameli. She was just a character. I love that character, and I think the madness in her fitted my own madness.
Some wonderful words there from Gwere Mantashe, reflecting on his relationship with the deputy. Earlier on, in fact, he had reflected on how often the relationship between the ministers and deputies are often tense, cantankerous, and in fact are of a competitive nature. And this was not the case here, which is something that certainly should be a lesson to both ministers and deputy ministers, that you really just have to complement. Some of the relationships between ministers and deputy ministers are frankly embarrassing more than anything. And we find a situation where some of them some deputies have not even been properly assigned what they're supposed to do. It's just a mess. And here is a good thing to hear that there was one pair that was determined to work closely and work together. So we'll talk to Gwere Mantashe.
She would always remind us, even as an organization, but also even in government, shortest time as she has been, as conscious that as government we take those issues of women, of youth, of disability seriously in the work that we all do across government.
Some fantastic words there. As if you've just joined us, Baveli Lesongwa passed away over the weekend in a terrible, terrible car accident where, in fact, she wanted to assist a fellow motorist who had just had a car accident, and in the midst of that, a truck plowed through that scene, killing 4 people, including a deputy minister. Terrible, terrible stuff indeed. Of course, the weekend dominated by the funeral of Robert Mugabe. And as some commentators have said, the stadium not so full, half full, if you compare it to what happened during Joshua Nkomo's funeral. And so we can't simply brush that aside. But of course, we have bigger things to worry about. As our own president was booed at this funeral, booed by the Zimbabwe crowd there. And he, as I was earlier saying to Carmen, was able on his feet to basically apologize to the Zimbabweans immediately. I don't think it's something that he had planned. I don't think, excuse me, I don't think it's something that, he would have anticipated that crowd would boo him, because often at funerals we often don't expect such things to happen. But it happened, and he rose to the occasion to apologize. And I think the Zimbabweans welcomed it. If you guess, if you gauge by the crowd's response, but it sends a very simple message that South Africans' xenophobia will no longer be tolerated by other African countries. In the past, we managed to get away with it. If you look at the xenophobic attacks that happened about 3 years ago, and those that happened in 2008, which is almost a decade ago, we always get away with it, and sort of is brushed aside and so on. And I think the president has realized that it's something that it cannot be brushed aside. I want to commend him for appointing envoys to go around the continent to humble ourselves as South Africa in front of those nations that have sought refuge here. The same way that we sought refuge in our dark days of the apartheid state. It's simply intolerable that we can have a situation where as Africans we treat other Africans as children of a lesser God. It's simply totally, completely unacceptable indeed. Of course, in the last few weeks dealing with not just this xenophobic violence, but also the issue of gender-based violence that the president spoke about also as he was visiting the Grace Bible Church this morning. And in the midst of that, then you have this Bob Hewitt chap, right, seeking parole. I mean, the guy has not even spent 2 minutes in prison. Accused of sexual harassment by numerous people, sentenced to 6 years, so already looking for parole. And I want to commend the Minister of Justice for questioning that issue and beginning to take steps that will be in line with what we've been promised. We've been promised that people who are engaged in gender-based violence must get harsher sentences. That should mean they must also not spend 2 minutes in prison and now go and roam the streets again. Understand that he's an elderly person, I'm sorry about that, but he has to rot in prison. There is no other way of looking at this. There's no other way we can send a tough message to rapists and sexual molesters and pedophiles. The only way they're going to understand, the only language they can understand, is to spend the rest of their days removed from society. If we don't do that, if we pussyfoot about around this issue, we will commemorate every month deaths of young women, you know, whose lives are made miserable in the workplace, whose lives are made miserable in their churches, whose lives are made miserable on our streets. Cannot happen. So kudos there to the Minister of Justice for questioning the matter, and hopefully this fellow, Bob Hewitt, and others like him will rot in prison and not roam the streets. They must rot in jail. They, like the others who are still on trial, the omotosos of this world, they must know that heavy sentences await them. So that in the future, when they try to use the name of the Lord to molest young girls, they must know that they will spend the rest of their lives away from those girls, in prison, where they must rot. Security of our women. It's time we put a spotlight, big one, on business and how they are funding pedophiles to carry on in business. How they are finding some of their own business owners, managers, directors who get away with it because they are in situations where they are in total power there, which corrupts totally. So we've got a full menu still to talk about in the coming days, in the coming weeks. As we fight the scourge of xenophobic violence, we fight the scourge of gender-based violence. At the bottom of this hour, Kweda Mantashe joins me to pay tribute to Bob Hewitt, the Deputy Minister of Minerals and Energy, who passed away this weekend. Let's take a break now.